Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last session of the One Planet track today. Today's session, or this afternoon session, is called Advancing Animal Welfare to Meet Sustainability Targets. My name is Mette Herskin. I come from Aarhus University in Denmark, and it is my pleasure to chair this session. We have a packed program today for this afternoon, filled with expert speakers, allowing us to explore the interaction between animal welfare and different aspects of sustainability. And I would like to warmly welcome the speakers of today, those of you who are here in the room, and also our online speakers. Before I give the floor to the first speaker, I will run you quickly through the program of today. Because the session starts with 8 relatively short pitches from experts in animal welfare. And each speaker has only 10 minutes to present their angle or their viewpoint on the interface between animal welfare and sustainable food production. And to save time for the presentations, I will only give a short introduction to each speaker. And between speakers, there will be no time for questions. If you have questions, please use the conference app, and your questions may be raised during the panel discussion that will follow the pitches. But before we go on with the panel, there will be a coffee break between the pitches and the panel. And after the break, I'm looking forward to the moderated panel discussion. There, 4 of the presenters of today, Laura Higham, Linda Keeling, Paul Llonch, and Peter Stevenson will sit in the panel. And the debate will be moderated by Nick Chris from EFSA. And also here, if you have questions that you think should be raised during the panel, please send them via the app, and they may be taken up in the panel. And should any of you in the online audience, should you be interested, then please join the post-session virtual lounge, where there is an opportunity to meet the speakers. I will tell more about that later. But for now, I think it's time to get started, and I would like to welcome the first speaker of today, Peter Stevenson from Compassion in World Farming. Please, Peter. And Peter will speak about the topic, improving animal welfare can deliver triple sustainability win. Please.
Sorry, my battery pack fell off just as I was coming up. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good, good. Nothing seems... Right, thank you. Improving animal welfare can lead to several health benefits: reducing antimicrobial resistance, lower risk of zoonoses and pandemics, and food of better nutritional quality. The crowded, stressful conditions of industrial livestock production can lead to the emergence, spread, and amplification of pathogens. A recent study concludes that large pig and poultry farms are where the genetic reassortment needed to develop pandemic influenza strains is most likely to occur. We need to move to health-oriented systems in which good health is inherent in the farming methods, rather than being propped up by routine use of antimicrobials. So what would these health-oriented systems look like? Well, they would avoid overcrowding, and they would minimize stress, as this undermines animals' immune competence. They would ensure that animals can engage in their natural behaviors, as inability to do so is highly stressful. There'd be no early weaning of pigs, as this often involves high antimicrobial use. They would avoid excessive herd and flock sizes, as these can promote the transmission of pathogens. They would minimize the mixing of unfamiliar animals. They would ensure good air quality. And crucially, they would avoid the use of animals genetically selected for very fast growth and high yields, as these animals are susceptible to immunological and metabolic problems. Free-range animals who consume fresh forage and have high activity levels often produce food of better nutritional quality than industrially reared animals. Pasture-fed beef and free-range chicken have less total fat, but more of the beneficial omega-3 fatty acids than grain-fed beef and factory-farmed chicken. I want to look at some of the environmental aspects of sustainability. The EU imports 32 million tons of soy a year. Most is used as animal feed, mainly in the pig and poultry sectors, and this contributes to deforestation in South America. The Commission says that almost 2/3 of EU cereals, wheat, maize, barley, are used to feed animals. And this huge demand by industrial livestock for cereals has played a key part in fueling the intensification of crop production, which with its monocultures and agrochemicals has led to soil degradation, overuse and pollution of water, and biodiversity loss. Also, animals convert cereals very inefficiently into meat and milk. The Commission's Joint Research Centre says that using highly productive croplands to produce animal feedstuffs represents a net drain of the world's potential food supply. Animals only make an efficient contribution to food security when they're converting materials we can't consume into food we can eat. So animals should be fed on grass, crop residues, byproducts such as brewers' grains and citrus pulp, and unavoidable food waste. And if animals were only fed on such materials, wonderful things would happen. There'd be a 50% reduction in global production and consumption of meat and dairy. That might seem radical, but it is essential if we're to meet the Paris climate targets. And reducing the number of animals farmed would make it possible to rear animals in high welfare, health-oriented systems. And reducing meat production would lower the demand for cereals and soy as feed. That would free up large amounts of arable land, making it feasible to move to regenerative agriculture. And animals have a vital role to play in sustainable circular farming. Their manure builds soil fertility and structure, so enabling carbon to be stored. But the amount of manure produced must be no greater than is needed to support crop production on that farm or nearby farms. And animals can convert food waste and byproducts into nutritious food, so recycling nutrients into the food system. And livestock's greenhouse gas emissions and those of feed production can, in regenerative agriculture, be compensated for by carbon capture on the farm. Animals with good welfare tend to be healthier, and so this can result in lower veterinary costs and less injuries, disease, and mortality. And in some cases, to better growth and feed conversion. But in other cases, improving welfare will involve farmers in extra costs. But society as a whole would benefit from the greatly reduced health and environmental costs that would arise from moving to high welfare, health-oriented systems located within regenerative agriculture. But society's gain can't be built upon farmers' losses. So we need to repurpose the CAP to support producers with high welfare standards and who farm regeneratively. We need to move to true cost accounting, in which the environmental costs of using agrochemicals and cereals and soy as feed are internalized in the price of these inputs, with all of the revenue raised being used to support farmers with high standards. We shouldn't assume that improving welfare can only be justified if it contributes to enhanced sustainability. Rather, we should recognize that good welfare is itself a core component of sustainability. Calls for action. Move to high welfare, health-oriented systems. Minimize the use of cereals and soy as feed. Mainly feed animals on materials that we can't consume. Reduce meat and dairy consumption. Move to regenerative agriculture. Repurpose CAP to support farmers with high standards. Introduce true cost accounting and recognize that good welfare is one of the core criteria that must be met by our food systems. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this powerful input to today's topic. You really got us started, Peter. And after this warm-up, I am happy to invite our second speaker to the stage, Linda Keeling from SLU in Sweden. And the title of Linda's presentation is Animal Welfare, Moving Forward to Help Score Sustainable Development Goals. Please, Linda.
Thank you very much for that introduction. We share our planet with animals, but if we don't take the welfare of animals into consideration, even if we achieve specific goals, they may not be sustainable in the long term. So animals are hardly mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, and their welfare is not mentioned at all. We use this definition of animal welfare. Animal welfare means the physical and mental state of an animal in relation to the conditions in which it lives and dies, which is the definition used by the World Organization for Animal Health. And we ask the question of how improving animal welfare would impact on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And then we ask the reverse question of how achieving the Sustainable Development Goals would impact on animal welfare. And we did it in a systematic way. We did it for each of the SDGs, and we did it according to this 7-point scale. So if a person scores the association as -3, then they're saying that these things cancel out. If you achieve one goal, it's impossible to achieve the other. Up at the other end, we have the +3, and here the person's saying, well, they're indivisible. If you achieve one goal, the other goal comes along as part of the package. And then we have these different scores in between. Now, you don't have to remember these. You just have to remember that if it's a minus score, it means a conflict. If it's a plus score, it means a co-benefit or a synergy. And these were the results from the first time we did this study. Each of these little circles is one SDG, so there's 17 of those, and that's the mean score. And then around that, you can see the range of the scores from the minimum to the maximum. And the thing that you can see directly is they're all up in the top right-hand corner. So this is the scale at the bottom, going from -3 to +3. So everything is on the positive side in the impact of improving animal welfare on achieving the SDG. And in the other way around, the score from -3 to +3 on the impact of achieving the SDG on animal welfare. And just because it's sometimes a bit difficult to remember which SDG says what, these are the ones. And of course, it's led up the usual suspects, but it's led up there by SDG number 12 and responsible consumption and production. These seem to be quite robust results. We repeated it again with students under a sustainability course. But what I'm going to talk about is, because it's the most recent study that we've done and because it was the largest, was carried out together with the World Organization for Animal Health in 2021 at their 3rd Animal Welfare Global Forum. And this gives me a chance to acknowledge my collaborators on this rather large study. And here are the results from that study. And you can see here now, again, positive. So I've zoomed in on the top right-hand corner there. So the scale is going from 0 to +3, and each of the small circles is one sustainable development goal. What I'm going to talk about now is how we might use this knowledge as a map to help guide future policy. I want to go back one. And the first thing to do is to focus on the strongest co-benefits. Identify potential allies that are working in the areas where you have the strongest co-benefits. And these are the ones that you would expect. SDG 3, association with human well-being, and also 12 and 14, the ones to do with the food chain. But we can be smarter than this. And maybe we can use this data to help identify previously unexpected allies, potential allies. So this is the same data, but now I've presented it as a radar plot. And here this allows us to put the data to separate out into 2 lines. So the blue line connected by the dots is the impact of animal welfare on achieving the SDG. And the green line with the dashes there is the impact of achieving the SDG on improving animal welfare. But again, it's still on the positive, so 0 in the middle, and then you can see as you go out, this is 1, 2, and 3. So the further out the data point, the stronger the co-benefit. And I've put just a red ring around those 3 from the previous diagram. And what I want to draw your attention to now are these other 3 dots, where the lines come together, showing that the impact is the same in both directions. So a second possible way to use this data to guide policy is to identify potential allies working in areas where the benefits are mutual. Because co-benefits are going to make the collaboration equally worthwhile for both organizations. Going to want to collaborate because it's this win-win situation. And the third example that I want to give, and here again, I've just put out those first 3 from the original diagram, is to draw your attention to these circles. And here you can see that the lines separate from each other. So if we take, for example, SDG 4 here, you can see that the blue line is further in, saying that if we improve animal welfare, we're not going to have a lot better education. But if we improve education here, and here I'm not talking about education on animal welfare, but schooling generally, that will have a big pull on improving animal welfare. And this results would suggest actually the same as SDG 3, which is the big One Health discussion. And then we can go on and look at the other ones here. This is SDG 6 about water. Well, of course, if we have clean water and better sanitation for humans, then it's going to be benefit for animals as well. Here we have number 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. We'll have a big pull on animal welfare, and of course number 17, the one on partnerships, because this whole bit is about identifying partnerships. So helping others achieve their goals will ultimately benefit animal welfare, because all these are on the outer edge here. These are strong co-benefits. So, in summary, what I want to say is this methodology can help organisations identify new policy opportunities that might be unavailable when they're working independently. Now, we did this study in collaboration with the World Organization for Animal Health, but you can imagine repeating this with other organisations in a particular country for their context, or with a particular species. So what's the take-home message? Well, there are many co-benefits between improving animal welfare and achieving the SDGs, and we can use these more effectively. We can be smarter. We can use a systematic approach like this to help organisations identify potential new partners for strategic relationships. Some of those are the expected ones, but we can find these unexpected ones, these new partnerships. And the collaboration opens up opportunities that would be unavailable when organisations are working independently. Organisations have different skills. Some have a lot of people on the ground. Others may have very good technical skills or be very good at handling the media. So together these organisations can tap into new resources. So it's a journey towards improving animal welfare. It's a journey towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and what we need is a better map. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for defining the topic of today, animal welfare, and also for bringing in the sustainability goals. The third speaker today is Laura Higham from FAI and University of Edinburgh. Laura, please, you are going to talk about understanding synergies and trade-offs in sustainability outcomes in food animal production. Here you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here today to continue these important discussions on the interplay between animal welfare and sustainability. And thank you so much to EFSA for inviting me to speak today, and to the previous two speakers for their fantastic talks. So my name is Laura Higham. I am a veterinarian, a PhD student at the Global Academy for Agriculture and Food Systems, and a veterinary consultant at FAI in the UK. I'll be talking to you today about animal welfare and its positioning in the sustainability discourse, the synergies and trade-offs in food animal production, sustainability pressures in commercial supply chains, and then finishing off with an example from my PhD research of a multi-criteria decision tool that can help us to sort through and balance multiple, often conflicting sustainability objectives. So firstly, continuing from the previous two speakers, we're asking, is animal welfare a sustainability issue? Well, explicit mention of animal welfare is lacking from many traditional sustainability frameworks and definitions, especially those that are more anthropocentric in their nature, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Inclusion of animal welfare in these frameworks has both intrinsic value, arising from our understanding of animal sentience, for which there is now broadly a global consensus, and also instrumental value, meaning there are often collateral benefits for humans of good animal welfare and high welfare production systems. In some cases, these benefits can include food safety and quality, animal health and productivity, the satisfaction of emerging consumer preferences, farm worker well-being, and environmental stewardship. And we're increasingly recognising that the absence of negative affective states, as defined by the 5 freedoms of animal welfare, is insufficient to fulfil the needs of animals, but we need to be delivering opportunities for positive welfare, as per the concept of a good life. Again, the provision of these opportunities needs to be included in our sustainability goals. For assessments, the collection of animal welfare outcome measures is challenging but possible. Through engagement with retailers and food service businesses and their supply chain intermediaries, farm and factory outcome measures can be collected and monitored. And once included in sustainability definitions, improving animal welfare metrics becomes integral to successfully achieving our sustainability goals. Amongst other sustainability issues is antimicrobial resistance, another metric infrequently explicitly included in sustainability frameworks. AMR has been described as the quintessential One Health challenge with impacts in the human, animal and environmental domains. AMR is amongst the most significant and pressing challenges affecting human health, which is predicted to claim 10 million lives a year globally by 2050. Amongst the contributors to the global health burden of AMR is antibiotic use in animals. And antibiotic use in animals is also a precursor to diffuse environmental pollution with antibiotic residues and antibiotic resistance determinants as they accumulate in the so-called resistome. In addition to the human health impacts of AMR, are domestic animal health and welfare consequences and their associated socio-economic impacts, and environmental risks too. Antibiotic residues and their metabolites have been found to affect a number of aquatic organisms, bacteria, macroinvertebrates and plants. AMR determinants have also been detected in wildlife species, such as in vulture populations, attributed to the scavenging on the carcasses of livestock. This has raised concerns for the health and conservation of vultures and other wildlife species, but also raised concerns for human and domestic animal health, as these wildlife species may represent reservoirs of multi-drug resistant strains. Antibiotic use in livestock as a contributor to the global burden of AMR can be monitored, which is challenging in certain sectors, but possible through supply chain collaboration. And antibiotic use thereafter can be included as a sustainability metric in our assessments. Sorry, I've gone back on my slides a little here. Contributing to these global animal welfare and public health concerns is the significant increase in demand for and production of livestock. Indeed, we're in the midst of what's known as the livestock revolution, and to fulfill our growing demand for animal products, we're producing more. Our farms are growing, intensifying, specialising, consolidating, and becoming increasingly efficient. This transformation has been profound, and although it's been accompanied by resource use efficiencies and associated environmental benefits, there are also some well-known trade-offs, namely for animal welfare, antibiotic use, and certain environmental measures. Modern broiler production is perhaps the best exemplar of these trends and trade-offs in agriculture. In the broiler industry, developments have been characterised by dramatic changes in bird biomass, morphology, carcass balance and growth rates, alongside nutritional, health and husbandry developments. These efficiencies or synergies have dramatically increased productivity, improved feed conversion ratios, reduced greenhouse gas emissions per unit of biomass, driven land and labour efficiencies, and they've given consumers what they want, which in many geographies is primarily breast meat and quality protein affordable for many. But the flip side is that birds are more vulnerable to breed and production associated diseases such as tibial disc chondroplasia, mobility problems, sudden death syndrome, hockburn and pododermatitis, lack of behavioural opportunity, and a number of environmental trade-offs too, mainly arising from feed production off-farm. And a similar picture can be seen in other farmed species too. This combination of sustainability gains in productivity, carbon footprint and land and labour use as a result of changes in genetics, nutrition, health and housing in recent decades is at the expense of what have historically been seen as secondary considerations, many of which in an economic sense are considered by some to be public goods, such as animal welfare, antibiotic use and biodiversity. But these considerations are no longer secondary. Indeed, for some, they carry equal importance for a safe, ethical and sustainable food future alongside carbon and food security considerations, with growing awareness of the grave consequences of neglecting them, the nature crisis, the environmental resistance epidemics, widespread animal suffering. Perhaps now it's time to harness some of the extraordinary developments that we've seen in agriculture to date, whilst ensuring we integrate the full and more holistic suite of measures that matter to us as a modern society, to mitigate these unacceptable trade-offs and promote positive impacts for people, animals and the environment. Food producers and processors are feeling these pressures too. Government and industry targets, plus retailers, NGOs and shareholders are demanding high volumes of animal products, but from high welfare, low antibiotic use and environmentally sustainable systems. But how can they achieve so many outcomes all at once and choose the most efficient systems to source from? A multi-criteria decision tool called data envelope analysis can be used, a linear programming technique that I'm exploring as part of my PhD research, in broiler production specifically. Using this method, farms, flocks or crops of chickens can be benchmarked according to their performance across multiple outcomes, and the tool assigns a top efficiency score of 1 to those units on the so-called frontier. These are the units that are most efficient at generating the desirable output, which in this case is biomass of chicken meat, with the least inputs or costs. And in my model, these inputs include resource use like number of chicks placed, feed intake, and also animal health and welfare outcomes, both on farms and at processing, such as incidence of hockburn, pododermatitis, leg and wing breaks, post-mortem rejects, and antibiotic use. Environmental measures could also be included too. And once the most efficient farms or flocks have been identified, their common characteristics can be identified using regression to help inform future policy. And there are a number of reasons why this approach is valuable. Firstly, efficiency, as it's denoted in this method, consists of not just 1 or 2 sustainability outcomes like productivity and carbon emissions, but an array of sustainability measures which can be defined through stakeholder consultation to decide which criteria to include as inputs and outputs. This can allow for a multidisciplinary, bottom-up participatory approach. The model can be run at regular intervals to benchmark the most efficient units, to capture emerging concerns and accommodate changing measures as new data is collected. Secondly, the outcomes of the analysis could help to reward best performing farmers that are successfully balancing multiple objectives. It could also inform future policy and direct incentives towards certain production practices and standards. So I'm coming to the end of my talk now, and I'd like just to finish by summarising my main calls to action. Firstly, I'd like to see animal welfare being explicitly included in sustainability definitions, frameworks and assessments. In turn, this would help to mitigate animal welfare trade-offs, which have frequently been observed in the race for efficiency. Likewise, for antibiotic use, obtaining reliable data at farm level is challenging for some species, but incorporating usage into sustainability assessments also helps to mitigate public health risks as a trade-off in the pursuit of other objectives. Retailers and other food businesses are increasingly seeking means to achieve multiple sustainability outcomes, and benchmarking tools such as DEA, as presented here, can be deployed amongst other tools too, which can include a full suite of measures and can accommodate multi-stakeholder viewpoints and emerging evidence. Thank you very much, and I look forward to joining the panel session later for further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for bringing in antibiotic use and AMR into the topic of today, and also for sharing some of your own research with us. Now we move to the fourth speaker, and that is the speaker that is online. We have the next speaker is Gesa from University of Göttingen in Germany. Welcome, Gesa. And Gesa will talk about public perceptions of animal husbandry and welfare, how to respond properly. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me to give this talk, in which I will talk about the public views on animal husbandry and welfare and what the industry but also science do to respond properly to these public concerns. And what you all know is that we see over the last few years an increasing public concern about animal welfare in the current intensive livestock farming systems that we mainly have in several countries around the world. And these concerns that many people from outside agriculture have are not only dedicated to one species, but there are severe concerns for all the major species that we keep in animal farming, such as cattle, pigs, and poultry. And these public criticisms include very much all domains of animal welfare. So there are concerns about animal health, there are concerns about the naturalness of husbandry systems, about species appropriate behavior, but also about effective states that the animals that we keep in intensive systems have. And if we want to sum up this in one sentence, one could say that many people from the public say that, well, in animal farming, it's all about profit and animals don't count, or at least don't count enough. And in our work, we do a lot of research on public opinions and public perceptions of farming systems. And I just wanted to show you some of the results to get a deeper understanding of public perceptions. And we did a study on the case of cattle last year, where we asked around 1,000 German residents on how they perceive milk, so dairy farming and beef cattle farming. And the sample that we have used for this study is representative in terms of age, gender, income, and regional distribution in Germany. And we started with very basic questions where we just ask whether people agree or disagree with the statement that husbandry conditions for dairy cows should be improved. And what you see here is that over 80 or nearly 80% of our sample agreed to this statement. And if we take a look at how this looks for beef cattle, the number is even a little higher, with over 80% from the public perceiving or agreeing that husbandry conditions should be improved. And these numbers are quite aligned with other studies from other European countries and also with the results of the Eurobarometer on animal welfare that you might know. But we wanted to take a little deeper look and really dive into what people think should be improved and where they see the problems. So we asked people, what do you think are major problems in dairy production that we are facing today? And what you see here, what you see on this slide, are open answers of our participants. So it was named that cows have no outdoor access, that they are perpetually pregnant to give milk, that they are overbred to give milk, and that there's early separation of cow and calf, to name only a few of the mentioning that has been made by our participants. And what was really interesting to us was that topics appeared that hasn't been there a few years ago, such as breeding and overbreeding and performance measures are more in public perceptions nowadays than it has been a few years ago. And for the case of beef cattle, we saw something like animals have no space, animals are always inside a barn, or that husbandry in general is bad. We further wanted to ask, well, if there are so many problems perceived by the public in animal farming, what are the main things for an ideal animal farm? And how important are the following aspects for people? And what we see here is the importance levels of different sustainability aspects, or aspects that could be used to describe a farm, and how important people think that this should be met on an ideal farm, so a farm that people really like and where they would like to buy products from. And the first thing that I don't know why it disappeared here is animal welfare, where over 90% of our participants think that this is very important, or rather important, to be met on an ideal farm. And this is followed by environmental protection and climate protection. So the top scorers in an ideal farm are all from the sustainability domain. And with regard to these public concerns that we can observe, the sector strategy to encounter the criticisms for many years was to argue that, well, people have these criticisms towards livestock farming because they don't know anything about livestock farming, that we have a large gap between people's knowledge about livestock farming, and that most people from within the public don't know much about why certain things are done on farms, and this leads to people criticizing how practices are done and how systems look like. And this is something that in science we call the knowledge deficit hypothesis, that is based on the assumption that experts in the field are right and lay people are wrong because they don't know enough to judge a situation. But although over the last years there has been immense efforts from within the industry, the farming industry, to increase knowledge within the public and to educate people about why certain things are done, we couldn't see really an improvement in acceptability of farming systems. So we need to really question whether it is a successful strategy trying to educate the public and just to increasing knowledge, and that this will then lead to people accepting farming practices. While informing the public, well, there is definitely an information deficit in large parts of society, but informing the public about animal production and current practices is good to increase transparency, and it can raise awareness for topics that are related to animal food production. But we have also learned that increasing knowledge in the public will not increase acceptance for farming practices, especially if those are contrasting people's values and attitudes. But if it's not about knowledge, what are then the reasons for criticisms? And I argue that this is based in a changed human-animal relationship that we can observe over the last probably 2 decades. So we see that the demands for an ethically correct treatment of farm animals have drastically increased in many European countries, but also other countries such as the US. And we see that anthropocentric attitudes that consider the man as the crown of creation are not supported on a broad basis anymore in our societies. Many people have experiences with pets, and we can see that experiences that people have with pets change their values and attitudes that they have also towards farm animals. And if we consider that every second household in Germany and in many other European countries is living together with a pet, this might also impact, or this also impacts views on how we treat farm animals. And of course, we have new scientific knowledge, first about emotional, cognitive, and social abilities of animals, as well as knowledge on genetic similarities between humans and animals gained from science that are communicated within the public, to the public, and that shapes also public views on how we should treat animals. And of course, there is a fear of many people of being negatively affected through animal farming, for example, through antibiotic resistance or zoonosis. Well, if we consider all this, one should ask the question, well, should we use animals at all, or is the public against animal farming? And while a colleague of mine did a study on how should we treat animals, and she found that over 60%, again here in a German sample, are allowed to kill animals. I agree that we are allowed to kill animals, but if we do so, this needs to be done without causing pain. Over 80% agree that we can use animals, but we need to fulfill their needs. And the highest agreement gets the statement that if we use animals, we should guarantee them a good life. Well, my conclusions on how to position the sector are that we know that we need to acknowledge that knowledge on current farming practices in the public is low, and that when people are made aware of many of these farming practices lack public support because they are contrasting people's values. But there is a consensus for most people that we can use animals, but a good life needs to be guaranteed. But of course, this good life can mean very different things for different stakeholders, especially if we consider people from within and outside the sector of animal farming. So what are the calls for action? So I think we need to find a consensus about what a good life includes, and we should reposition the livestock farming sector through taking a more active role in shaping a more sustainable and more animal-friendly future of animal farming. And we need to stop wanting to educate the public about what is right and what is wrong, but we need to rather acknowledge public demands and incorporate them in the design of more sustainable farming systems that are in the end more animal-friendly. And the role of science in this process can be that through transdisciplinary projects, we find evidence for what a good life and good treatments of animals really is. And in these projects, we also should include public opinion and ethics, because this is really helpful of livestock farming that yields higher animal welfare levels and is more acceptable for many people. And with this, I'd like to thank you for listening and for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Gesa, for bringing in the public and for showing us how public opinion seems to change during these years, maybe due to changes in human-animal interactions. We continue with an online speaker as a next pitch. The next speaker is Eddie Bokkers from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Welcome, Eddie. And Eddie, he will talk about animal welfare in a circular food system. Eddie, please.
Thank you for this kind introduction and giving me the floor. Thank you for inviting me. We know that on a global... let's see how we can find the next slide. Yeah. We know that on a global level, 1/3 of food is lost or wasted during production, processing and consumption. And we also know that 40% of the global arable land is used to produce human eatable feed, such as grains and soy for livestock, for which half is used for monogastric animals. In Europe and many other countries, these monogastric animals, such as pigs and poultry, are often kept in intensive production systems, which highly depend on external inputs, such as grains, energy, chemicals, and also they have a high environmental impact. Think of emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions, dust. These systems have, in these intensive systems, animals are generally kept in barren environments with few opportunities to express species-specific behavior. And there's quite some evidence that these animals often have an impaired welfare. So there is a need to move to a food system that produces healthy and nutritious food in an environmental friendly way, which also respects the needs of humans and animals. A circular food system could be a promising alternative, which is also already pointed out by Peter in an earlier presentation. So de Boer and Van Littersum defined 3 principles for a circular food system. Land is primarily used to produce plant biomass for human consumption. Waste and losses from food production, processing and consumption must be prevented, but if unavoidable, be recycled back into the food system. And farm animals should mainly convert food waste and byproducts not suitable for human consumption and convert biomass from grasslands. So how does this look like? Well, we have here the human consumers and to consume food items and non-food items. And these items should originate from natural resources such as water, arable land, grassland and forest. So in this process of production and processing and consumption, all kinds of waste streams happen, and there are also co-products during processing. And they all have to go back into the system. And valuable products can be converted by animals into other valuable products which can be consumed by humans. For the non-food items, we have similar processes and similar circularity which go back into the system. So to produce animal feed within a circular food system, the feed ingredients are depending on availability, which actually is not different from the current situation. There might be variation between batches and ingredients, and aspects such as collection, transport and storage might need special attention. Ingredients might need to be treated before they can be used as animal feed. And not all ingredients might suit all farm animals. And since the production will depend on the size of the waste streams, the number of animals can be expected to decline. And also the species that are kept might change. So the ratio between species might change. We might need other breeds, which can also have other production levels. And finally, there might be aspects of changing the feeding system or even the housing system. However, this is all seen from a prime objective of a circular food system, which is to close nutrient cycles. And this does not automatically mean a better life for the animals, as it can potentially all be realized in the current production system. The inclusion of animal welfare, which is also an important societal issue related to food production, is often ignored in the discussion around transition to alternative food systems, and which in my view would be a missed opportunity. So let's see what its potential means for welfare when changing to a circular food system. So first we need to have a look at the food and feed production chain. So we have the primary production, the processing and packaging phase, we have retail and distribution, and finally the households which consume the products. In all these phases, there are waste products produced, and in the processing and packaging phase, there are buy and co-products. A specific item is the food items produced by the primary production, especially for animals. So the current feed ingredients can be seen here. So we have the food items, some waste streams, and the co and byproducts that are currently used as feed ingredients for animal feed. When we change to a circular food system, I have to say, then the food items that are directly produced for animal feed and that are actually eatable by humans directly should be stopped. And other waste streams, let's say the waste from households and retail and distribution, should potentially be used in animal feed. However, that's currently not allowed due to EU legislation. There are several aspects of using waste streams as feed ingredients that may affect animal welfare. First, the nutritional value. Feed ingredients should provide an adequate diet that meets the requirements of the animals, such as fat, protein, carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, etc. And these components vary per resource. Also, attention should be given to the variation between batches and suppliers and the presence of anti-nutritional factors, which may affect the quality of feed. From a physical perspective, the amount of fiber is important in relation to satiation. It's also important how the final feed is provided, for example, as dry or wet feed, as meal, pellets, or as raw products. And the latter has the potential for animals to forage and chew, which is beneficial from an animal welfare point of view. Also, the sensory quality is an important factor because it influences, for example, the palatability and therefore the feed intake. With respect to the provision of feed, allowing animals to select and compile their own diet, let them calibrate their feed preferences and feed intake based on the post-ingestive feedback on their nutritional needs. And since foraging behavior is an important factor for animals, feed should provide this opportunity performing this behavior. The fourth feed aspect is contamination. So the biological hazards include pathogens such as viruses, bacteria, fungi that can be present in the feed ingredients. But also physical hazards need to be taken into account, such as pieces of glass, metal, plastics. Chemical hazards are residues of heavy metals, pesticides, medicines, etc. So all these factors can have both positive and negative effects on welfare. And if we want to know more about this, we need to assess this by looking at the behavior of animals, looking at the biological functioning and health, but also, if possible, looking at their affective states. Figure does not look like how it should look, but anyway. So all these aspects can have an effect on these welfare issues. So the inclusion of waste streams in animal feed will reduce the feed-food competition and therefore reduce the environmental impact. And to make use of all waste streams, legislation needs to be adapted in the EU. Also, the economics of how waste streams can be used most efficiently needs attention. That is also related to the scale and the location, and it depends on where you process the feed, whether it be on farm or on central location and a big plant. The various feed aspects that can have both negative and positive effects for welfare, but actually these are not so much different from the current situation, as long as feed is provided as concentrates in pelleted or mashed form. However, animals do not need only good feed for a good welfare. Therefore, the envisioned transition to the circular food system is an opportunity to simultaneously improve animal welfare, for example, by increasing their dietary variation, giving them more space, enrich their environment, and so stimulate the species-specific behavior and improve welfare. So that would be my ask for action. Before I finalize this presentation, I would like to show you two examples of systems in the Netherlands that have recently been developed and that can combine circularity and animal welfare. So here we have the KIPSA system, which is a system which tries to combine the circularity and animal-friendly production. So we see here a barn which is highly enriched. There is daylight in the barn, and the animals and the feed is scattered on the floor, so the animals can forage in the system. They have an outdoor run. The system is almost energy neutral, and the animals are fed only on waste streams to produce eggs. Another example is the so-called zonvarken, and actually they have the same aim. They try to combine circularity and animal-friendly production by providing the animals a lot of space, enrichment, etc. And the feed should mainly contain waste products to grow the pigs. And with this, I would like to thank my co-authors, Mark Brakke and Iris Bouwmans, and you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eddie, for taking us deeper into the opportunities for a more circular food system, and for showing us, I think, both the complexities, but also for giving concrete examples, such as the use of waste. The next speaker I will present now is a speaker that is here physically with us, and I would like to welcome Paul Llonch from University of Barcelona. Please, Paul.
Thank you, Mette. Thanks, EFSA, for inviting. That's a very nice, big, and well-organized conference, which I am enjoying a lot. Also listening to my previous speakers, which were very inspiring. So now I'm gonna speak about the benefits, of course, challenges, there is always challenges, of digital transformation of livestock agriculture for animal welfare and environmental sustainability. So I will focus more on the solution than the problem. We know already what are the pillars of sustainability. You have all of them here. The environmental impact, the animal welfare one, which is related to the societal or ethical, and finally, economics. There is always economics to sustain something. These are the goals of sustainability that have already been in place since the late 60s. So we have been a lot of time spending or thinking about the solutions on how to address sustainable development. We can say that these are all challenges, all problems. The problem is, though, that we need solutions for these all problems because they still remain, and it's very likely that they will be higher in the future. So why not to think on new solutions, new ways to address these all problems? And this is where I'm going to talk here, which is the digital or the digitalization of animal production and how this can benefit, support the sustainable development of animal production. So what are the opportunities from digitalization of animal production? Digitalization, we can also know it as the PLF, which means Precision Livestock Farming Technologies. Maybe you already have heard about that. And they bring some benefits which we can summarize in the following. First, they allow an individual monitorization of animals. That means that we get a granular analysis of what's going on in the farm. Then they also permit a continuous assessment. So we know 24/7 what is happening or what's the status of the animals at the farm. They also allowed anticipating what can be the animals, the health and welfare. And that is particularly important because it is the previous step for any corrective action. So in order to solve any problem, we need to know what happens and then we can act accordingly. First, a big and important benefit of digitalization is that it may increase the transparency of the whole animal production system. So showing what's happening with the animals at the farm, which can be used for certification or many other tools. And how do we envisage digitalization and more specifically to assess animal welfare? So just allow me to use the traditional or actually it's 5 domains, but we're going to summarize them here in the 4 domains of animal welfare, including health, behavior, feeding, and housing. And we can use the traits that can be assessed in the sensors, in the PLF technologies that we're implementing at the farms, so they can be integrated and give an overall score of animal welfare. Let me give you an example of that. For instance, we used trait number 1 on health. This can be counting somatic cell count of dairy cows, for instance. In behavior, one trait could be assessing the activity of a pig. In feeding, we could also measure feeding time of a cow. And finally, for housing assessment, we can, for instance, assess the body temperature of an animal to see whether it is coping well with the environmental temperature. As said, this will give us an overall score of animal welfare. So, having this approach clear, I hope, what if we do exactly the same with environmental information? What if we collect different information from indicators that should be objective and quantifiable to assess the environmental score and also the economic scores? So gathering the 3 pillars of sustainability, and finally we could obtain a sustainability score, right? This is precisely what we're doing in a project which at UAB we are participating. This is Clear Farm project, and it's kind of summarized in this figure you have in the slide. So we are collecting information for different outputs in the farm from the animal, but also from the environment, and they are being integrated following the procedure that I just explained into this platform. The platform is able to inform the producers on what's going on in the farm in terms of economics, environment, and animal welfare. This can also be used for other ways, as for instance, to increase transparency, as we said, for certification, and then inform consumers. Therefore, consumers can be better informed and take purchase decisions according to what, their expectations on these outcomes. The way we see, or we are planning to use such an information tool for consumers, is that consumers can use any smartphone, any device, scanning a code, bringing information on animal welfare, environmental welfare, and so on. So basically providing the trade-offs of the production of that given product. So to summarize, let me explain let me highlight what are the main challenges of digitalization of animal production in relation to sustainability. First, there is still a long way to reach the sustainability goals, so we may implement new solutions to address them. Another challenge is the management of large digital data sets from PLF data integration for meaningful outcomes. The opportunities that they bring is that PLF is a new paradigm on the assessment of animal welfare and productivity based on objective, systematic, and continuous monitorization of the farm. Digital information may be used by several stakeholders, including producers, certification bodies, regulators, and consumers. I would just like to finish this presentation with kind of a call for action. So we have the knowledge. What should we do with this? First, we should be putting technology in the service of sustainable development. Secondly, looking for win-win solutions. These are strategies that bring the best trade-offs for animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and why not economical sustainability. And of course, implement them. There is a lot of knowledge in this room today. So we should put science and knowledge available for society and the relevant stakeholders. And of course, we have to identify the stakeholders that will bring the change, that will make it happen. Consumers' choice is one of the most powerful tools for change. Just let's do this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for this powerful presentation, for bringing in the thinking of new solutions based on digitalization and precision livestock farming, and also explaining for us how data can be integrated to inform about animal welfare. And of course, for presenting the Clear Farm project to us. We have now two more speakers in this session. They will both be presenting from online. The first one is Francisco Galindo from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Good afternoon, Francisco, and welcome. Please.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you to EFSA and the organizers of this conference for inviting me and being able to talk to you about a research project that we have been carrying out in the Yucatan Peninsula in the south of Mexico, precisely by integrating animal welfare measurements on the provision of environmental services in extensive systems. This project started 12 years ago, basically as a response to the need to work urgently on a more sustainable livestock systems in the tropics, in part due to the well-known trends in the increase of the consumption of animal products worldwide, and the pressure this imposes in the region, in Latin America in general, in the tropics. Linda has already mentioned that probably one of the most important challenges of humanity is the compliance of the SDGs, and by transforming extensive systems into more sustainable forms of production can allow us to fulfill and to achieve some of these goals. Basically, because these systems have had a strong impact socially, still communities are very poor, there's still malnutrition in infants, the incidence of the infectious diseases is very high, and of course the impact on the environment, as we know, deforestation and the loss of biodiversity, and especially now these very relevant biodiversity laws and the link with the possibility of more pandemics and the outbreaks of zoonotic diseases is very high. And other impacts as the contribution to climate change and water pollution. And of course, this has to be linked with the animal welfare global agenda. We still have some very important pending issues on animal welfare conflicts, the high incidence of infectious diseases, and the low efficiency of the products could be in a way attended by solving many of these animal welfare issues. So this project really had the aim initially of integrating, and as Laura was saying, measuring synergies and trade-offs between these sustainability criteria and considering animal welfare as one of these criteria. We have worked in the Yucatan Peninsula and now extended to the Gulf of Mexico, and we have been working at two different scales, at the landscape scale, but also at a range scale, by comparing several variables, animal welfare variables and environmental variables in different systems, the monoculture systems, the conventional monoculture systems in the area, and we have been comparing this with intensive silvopastoral systems, as we call them, a combination of three strata of vegetation, grass, shrubs, and trees. And also we have comparing this with the native silvopastoral systems, or less managed fragments of forests that are still used, especially in the dry seasons by cattle, because they offer, apart from all these environmental services, the possibility of having a huge variety of edible plants for cattle. Well, the main results focus mainly on the very obvious difference of microclimatic conditions for cattle in silvopastoral systems. We have seen a lower temperature and humidity index in comparison to monoculture systems, and this, of course, reflects in many animal behavior and physiological responses. In relation to behavior, it is also very clear how cattle can use these resources, basically the shade, and optimize in a way the foraging times and lie down and rest during the hours of higher temperatures. And of course, this can relate to many other issues related to energetic waste and optimizing also dry matter intake. We have also looked at social behavior, and we have seen that in silvopastoral systems, the frequency of non-agonistic interactions is higher, possibly also because of these microclimatic conditions and because of the synchronicity of the herd in the systems. And in a way, this higher frequency of affiliation is related also to more stable groups measured by the index of linearity, or the Lando linearity index. So this, in a way, also reflects in more stable groups, and of course benefits in relation to the social stress of animals. When we applied the welfare quality protocols, we confirmed several anecdotes that we heard that the cattle in general is more docile in this type of systems, and we precisely saw this by this indicator, the short flight distance of cattle in relation to the percentage of tree coverage. And again, this is probably related to these microclimatic conditions that provoke less reactivity, less fearful response, and this is an important indicator of animal welfare. This relates also to some physiological responses. We have been looking at thermography. Basically, what we have seen is that skin temperature is much higher in cattle in the monoculture systems, both in the dry and in the rainy seasons. This is an example of the images. We have taken photographs in the paddock, but these animals, especially in this region of Mexico, are taken to pens at 6, 7 in the evening. And we have also taken some images after they are taken to the pen, and still temperature is higher in those cows that come from the from the monoculture systems in comparison to the silvopastoral systems, which can tell us about how important this is for energetic waste in general. We also measured respiratory rate, and as we see in this graph, again, the respiratory rate for cows in the monoculture systems, both in the rainy and in the dry season, is much higher. So this confirms, in a way, this sort of heat stress condition that is provoked in the monoculture systems. Now, when we looked at some variables related to biodiversity, in this case, we have information on species richness and abundance of birds, of bats, and rodents at 2 different scales. And looking at the rank scale of the 3 types of systems, basically we see that it's very similar, species richness in both intensive and the native silvopastoral systems, which can provide a lot of advantages in relation to how biodiversity can act as a buffer for the outbreaks of zoonotic diseases. Precisely following this hypothesis, we see a trend, very important trend, of having a higher abundance of species that can act as susceptible hosts to zoonotic pathogens, specifically the West Nile virus. In the case of birds, in the case of bats, and in the case of rodents, we see this trend in the monoculture system, which is something very important to consider when we can eventually use silvopastoral systems as a way to restore ecologically and to use this as a way to mitigate the outbreaks of zoonotic diseases and future pandemics in a way. In relation to gases, there's a very important group in animal nutrition in the Yucatan Peninsula and the University of Yucatan. And it is very interesting how they have been doing some trials and measuring how different components, some diets, combining grass and combining some native plants of legumes like Leucaena leucocephala can reduce the emissions of methane because of the saponins that these plants have. And this, combined with the possibility of having more carbon storage in these three strata vegetation paddocks or systems, in a way can allow us to have a very positive balance in relation to the emission of greenhouse gases. So it's a win-win situation in several ways. We still have to integrate this into several sustainability measuring tools. We have been using the SAFA protocols, the life cycle assessment, and others. And definitely, we think it's a very important tool to be able to eventually integrate animal welfare as a criteria for sustainability, as we have said before, to measure at a system level the synergies and the trade-offs between sustainability criteria, and not just in the case of extensive systems. As Eddie was saying also, this is very important for intensive systems. And as a call for action, I think we need to work more on transdisciplinary research. This is a complex issue, and we need to develop new policies, more efficient policies based on science in order to integrate these sustainability criteria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francisco. And thank you for describing the different projects and for bringing in the extensive production also for today, and also biodiversity laws. Thank you, Francisco. It's now time to call for the last speaker, but definitely not the least, of today's session. I am happy to welcome Harry Blokhuis, who's not here but will be online too. Harry Blokhuis from SLU in Sweden. Harry? Oh, there you are. Welcome, Harry. Thank you. The floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Mette. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from a warm and sunny Sweden. I'm the coordinator of the Pathways project together with Lawrence Smith, and we are both located at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala. Pathways is a European Union financed project under the Horizon 2020 program. We are 29 partners. You see the logos in the box on the slide, from 12 different countries in Europe. And you see where we are from on the map on the right. The total budget of the project is 9 million euro, and the start date 1st of September last year. And we are supposed to run the project for 5 years. The focus of Pathways is on identifying and increasing sustainable practices along the supply and production chains of European livestock. And we include dairy, pork, beef, poultry meat, eggs, and sheep and goats. Livestock-based farming has several very important roles and very positive aspects. It has an important role in food, nutrition, and security. You see the enormous production of the different meat types, and that is increasing over the years. It also contributes to the vitality of rural territories and the livelihood of rural communities. But it has also some negative issues. For instance, greenhouse gas emissions. In Europe, nearly 70% of all European agricultural greenhouse gas emissions comes from livestock-based farming. There is also increasing concern about the impact of intensive production on animal welfare and biodiversity. The concerns on animal welfare are, for instance, illustrated by the recent European Citizens Initiative that was collecting 1.4 million signatures in support of ending cage housing in animal production. Within some segments of the population, the human population, overconsumption of meat has reached unsustainable levels. And this results in excess weight, obesity, and an increased risk of chronic diseases, such as cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. So, several negative aspects. The challenge for a sustainable development of the livestock sector is to stay within the planetary boundaries whilst addressing societal demands, providing ecosystem services and supporting the needs of growing populations. The livestock system redesign is required at all levels. The objective of Pathways is to inform policy, research and business strategies in support of such a transition to more sustainable livestock production and consumption. In the project, we defined different steps. We start with defining the current situation and develop the sustainable visions for 2050. Then we develop holistic assessment methodologies. With holistic, we mean not only focus on environmental impact and greenhouse gas emissions, which is often the focus of assessments, but also include effects on animal welfare, biodiversity, economy, etc. Then the next step is to identify innovations that allow this sustainable development, and finally to design and evaluate scenarios and transition pathways. We have two key project components to reach the realization of these steps. It's practice hubs, we call them, and multi-actor platform. And I try to explain what that is. The practice hubs are groups of farmers, and we organize them around the OECD areas of innovation, which is product innovation. I can't even read that. I need glasses. Product innovation, production techniques, marketing, and organizational innovations. And we try to cover more intensive and more extensive production and mainstream and niche production. So altogether, we defined 16 of these practice hubs. And they are led by industry partners in collaboration with facilitators that we train in the project. So each hub is showing an innovation that works in a specific context. The second component is the European multi-actor platform. It's consisting of international supply chain actors. We try to get up to 50 individuals in that platform. We are currently up to about 40, 45, and they represent pre- and post-farm gate industry, consumer associations, NGOs, and also DGs from the European Commission, Directorate Generals. And they are organized, the discussion is organized around 3 themes that I can't develop further in this short time, but it focuses on trade-offs and synergies, one welfare, and enabling transition. There is constant engagement and interaction throughout the project between these 2 components, the European platform and the practice hubs. That is illustrated in this figure. And they give, during the project lifetime, first they help mapping the visions for 2050, and then they give feedback on baseline assessments, innovation assessments, and finally on the future pathways and scenarios that we define. In summary, pathways will support the transformation of Europe's livestock sector through active industry engagement and robust science. It will deliver co-developed transition pathways, but the main issue that I want to stress here is that it has regular engagement of stakeholders with project processes, and we believe that this will maximize the synergies and ensure the project's impact. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Harry, for presenting the Pathways project for us. I think it's a very interesting work, and I look forward to follow the project and its results. And with this, I would like to close this first part of today's session with a big thank you to all the speakers, both the ones of you here in the room and also the online speakers. Thank you very much. And also thank you, of course, to everyone in the room and everyone online for attending this first part. The next part, the next real part in the agenda is the moderated panel debate. But before we start that one, I do think it's time for a coffee break. So now it's time to break. And please enjoy your coffee break. And we are a bit late. So if you can all be back in here at 5 minutes after 4. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to this final part of today's afternoon session on animal welfare and sustainability. Now it's part for the moderated panel discussion. And in the panel today we have 4 of the expert speakers. It is Paul Llonch from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. It is Laura Higham from FAI and Edinburgh University. It is Linda Keeling from SLU Sweden. And it is Peter Stevenson from Compassion in World Farming. And yeah, exactly. Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, the debate will be moderated by Nick Chris from EFSA. So now I will leave the stair and leave it to you. Please, Nick.
Thank you very much. Let's see if the microphone works. Welcome, everybody, to the session this afternoon. And I hope you all hear me. Very familiar faces also. So great to see you all and great for you to come. And I hope that online we also have some familiar faces. And welcome you also online. Be active, be part of this panel discussion. Let's start it off with the most obvious question to me, which is animal welfare, yes, we talked about for a long time. Sustainability, is becoming more and more important, and is certainly a buzzword for some years now. The link, the direct link, is obvious from all your talks, but it's something that has not been talked about so long ago and seems to be something more new. Why? And maybe if I can start you off in order, so that we all get your opinions, and then later we sort of split it up to who wants to talk. But please, Paul.
Yep. So, if I may, well, I think in the past when we talk about sustainability, we used to think more on environmental aspects and economical and societal more in general. And I think that at some point we discovered that the ethical perspective is also considering how, not only how humans are treated in any production process, I mean workers and so on, but also animals as part of the animal production system, of course. So then I think it somehow raised the concern on how do we treat our animals to feed us, and that started to raise, you know, a concern and kind of the obligation to include animal welfare into the sustainability concept. Just to finish, I remember some colleagues working on animal welfare in the past saying, trying, you know, some people already linking these two things, and someone saying, I don't really see the you know, this link. And I think now is something that not only for the scientific community, but society in general, there is no doubt that animal welfare has an important role on sustainability.
Laura, something you want to add?
Yeah, I think there are some great points there, and I've not got a great deal to add, but I suppose a short history from the perspective of the Food Animal Initiative where I work. We came into existence in the 1990s, and at that time there was an emerging concern amongst citizens regarding food provenance. And you might remember the McLibel case in the 90s, and that for certainly citizens in the UK was the start of much more scrutiny about what was going on in supply chains. And from there we feel certainly a concern for food animals started to arise and become stronger and stronger over the years. And our work has reflected that in that we work with food businesses on those issues. It's still a moving feast. I think that animal welfare concern is growing all the time, and that's really important. But I think we are still in danger of working on hot topics within the sustainability arena, or at least within the sort of industry circles that I work in. At the moment, it's all about carbon in our work, and I would always try and advocate for, again, as per all of our talks, sort of advocate for a very balanced scrutiny of a range of sustainability indicators across carbon, across biodiversity, across animal welfare, antimicrobial usage, soil health, water use, water pollution, air pollution, a range of different indicators that each one cannot be looked at in isolation. And I think there is a danger within industry of sort of jumping on these hot topics, and they're all very important, don't get me wrong, but jumping on those topics to satisfy what's in the sort of the public in the public discourse, be that carbon or otherwise, and it really reflects what's going on in the media. The likes of obviously Extinction Rebellion has been fantastic at raising the profile of climate change, and that's really important. But within industry, I feel we have to try and keep an eye on all of the sustainability indicators. It's complicated, but there's a good reason why we need to stay focused on across the range of indicators that are important to us as a society.
Okay. Linda, you want to add something there?
Start.
It works.
It does.
It should.
Magic. Yes, thank you. I think the people working in animal welfare have been seeing this link for a longer time, but it was regarded as very much on the periphery. Yes, animal welfare there. We have these
They
big
haven't
issues.
shouted about it.
Maybe we were shouting, but people weren't listening.
Huh?
Whereas people were more concerned about the climate and the anthropocentric view that has been talked about. Whereas now I think it has lifted up. Maybe people are listening more, or maybe we're shouting more, but realizing that animals have an important role in this and their welfare is part of the sustainability. So I think that's one thing, the part of it, that people in animal welfare were talking about this, but other people had other issues that they were concerned on. Then I think there's another aspect, and the first one is, it's just such a big area. I mean, this is huge. Nobody knows where to start. Everybody should collaborate with everybody, and then when you're collaborating with everybody, everybody thinks somebody else is going to do it, and then in the end, nobody does it. So that's one thing, knowing where to start. And then the other thing is, then we start on very specific things, which miss the big picture. So we're working on one level up here, one level down there, and we're not really meeting in the middle. And that's why I think nothing is happening in that way.
Thank you. Peter?
I think people like myself, whose prime concern is animal welfare, many years ago, certainly with Compassion in World Farming back in the late 90s, recognized that we also need to argue the sustainability aspects of it. You know, in order to engage a broader chunk of society, particularly in the global south. I still get very frustrated that very often you read scientific papers about environmental issues. I'm thinking, for example, of a very good Dutch paper I read recently that will talk about all the obvious, sustainable, soil quality, water use, biodiversity loss, climate change, and will either not mention animal welfare at all, or it'll be just, tucked away in a sentence or two. And so I still think we need to get to the point, I tried to touch upon it earlier, that where we accept that animal welfare is a value of itself. It should be, any sustainable system has to not just have low greenhouse gas emissions, have, little impact on soil degradation, etc. It's got to have good animal welfare. It's a value in itself, and I think an awful lot of the problems that we have in the world today ultimately stem from a lack of respect for the world in which we live, not just the animals, but the natural world in which we live, and that we need to rediscover a real respect for our natural world, for our forests, for our rivers, and for our animals. It's really got to become part of a core value. Otherwise, we'll endlessly just be looking for high-tech solutions rather than fundamentally addressing where we've got to. Thanks.
Thank you. And I want to pick you up on one thing that you said there, because we heard also about research, about social research, about citizens' opinions, consumer opinions. What I have heard very little about, because you talk about animal welfare, you talk about animals, you also talk about always farmers. What you do to engage with farmers and farmers' opinions. Because, when you saw in the Gesa Bush presentation that farmers are perceived to be this, farmers are perceived to be that, but they're key stakeholders in the success of this story, whether it's welfare or sustainability. And you are all doing research on this. Is there enough done to engage and bring farmers along and make it attractive for them? Please, one of you.
The answer has to be no. There isn't enough being done. I would like to say that Compassion World Farming was founded over 50 years ago by a farmer who even then was getting concerned about how intensive livestock production was becoming. There are some farmers who are doing really wonderful jobs. Yes. We need to get awareness of those farmers into policymakers, into a broader section of farmers. So, for example, I'm thinking of one particular Scottish dairy farmer called the Ethical Dairy, which keeps the calves with the cows till they're 5 months of age. And is beginning to make an economic success of it, though it's a huge challenge. I'm thinking of, again, if one's thinking about farmers and the link between welfare and sustainability, some of the good examples seem to be coming from the Netherlands. Someone's got the Kipster farm was mentioned, where, and again, not all good welfare has to be outdoors. The Kipster farm is a basically indoor farm, but it's got great welfare. It's sustainable, it doesn't use any human edible feed. Yeah. There's a very good broiler farm in the Netherlands called Winstreck, which again has really good welfare. So we need to propagate to farmers
good stories.
And policymakers that there are some good farming models.
Anybody wants to come in here? Otherwise, we will go to a question from the audience. Please.
I could just add on to that. Yes, we can always do more, but a lot of research is done out on farms, and a lot of the farmers are very interested in this. It's good practice, good management. They want to do these things. I think it's the next level up where we have a problem. We're not doing enough with the people who buy the products from the farmers. So the farmers are often caught in between, wanting to do something, but not having the economic possibilities to do it. They have to take a huge risk if they're going to go along the line that you're suggesting. So we can always do more, but I would suggest that we need to be really targeting this next level.
And there, if I may, that brings me to another word, which, Paul, you were the only one. I sort of made sure, I sort of checked the presentation was there. You were the only one that mentioned it, labeling. And should we have labeling? Personally, I believe yes, but because for me it's a no-brainer. Yes, you need to, inform the consumer. But then my next question, given the name and topic of this session, should it be an animal welfare label, which we've talked about a lot, or should it now be a sustainability label that includes animal welfare, clearly?
Well, I think on my last slide, my last sentence was that consumers are probably one of the more powerful drivers of change, and that includes also animal welfare. So responding in short to your question, yes, I do think that labeling for animal welfare will very likely make this change happen. So if consumers are aware that the products they are buying are more animal welfare friendly, that is itself a driver for change. I think regarding the other sustainability issues, I think we can already see some labeling, the carbon footprint. There are many different labels on environmental issues, also on animal welfare in certain European countries. I guess now the challenge is to make this more global, more widespread and homogeneous through the at least European countries.
Please, Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, I think labelling is really important, and there's been an ongoing sort of argument, I suppose, in the UK about applying method of production labelling. However, I would say that there's a strong economic case for welfare, although consistently, and many people will know about this, but there's a very consistent citizen-consumer gap that's very apparent in terms of the voting of people in favour of animal welfare. That's usually by majority, that people want to see better welfare, in this case for farm animal welfare. But a gap between that and studies that show that they're not necessarily always willing to translate that into purchasing decisions in the supermarket. And there was usually it's sort of high 60%, something like that people are wanting to see better welfare for animals. Willingness to pay studies also usually say that people are in theory willing to pay for higher welfare products, but again, when it comes to purchasing decisions in the supermarket, that doesn't always translate. But it's absolutely important that in order to prop up the business case for improving welfare on a farm, that as citizens we behave as responsible consumers, and that's really important. And again, the studies are showing that there's many reasons why there is that citizen-consumer gap, and one of them is that that some people just don't know what they're looking for, or they don't have time to do their own research. And so this is where really clear, simple labelling can come in. It's not always simple, that's the problem, but clear labelling that perhaps can be further elaborated using QR codes or something else, that would be a really nice thing to offer consumers to try and narrow this gap down.
And labelling, for me, is also about choice. And choice can drive change. Because we hear these generalizations of what consumers want, what they're willing to pay for, But many other industries, including the car industry of all things, show you that if you give choice, you spread it out towards who is willing to pay for what, and then the industry follows that by providing it to the consumer. So if you see that 30% of consumers are willing to pay that amount for this amount of welfare, surely that's a driver for improvement. And this is a side issue, but I mean, labeling will not be an easy task. If I look at now what's happening in the EU and member states about the discussion about Nutri-Score, Nutri-Label, and even the aspect of what is a proper nutrition label, but it's a task worthwhile, you would agree? Taking on. Good, maybe we take some time to sort of look at the questions that we have here. To Peter Stevenson, how to address animal welfare in societies, countries where part of the population also lacks well-being?
That's a really good question, and I don't think there's an easy answer to it. I think one's got to look at a number of factors. One is that I tried to touch upon earlier, the nutritional quality of the food that's being produced. For example, I've been involved with our South African office in the debate about the use of battery cages in South Africa, and the argument, well, we've got to have the cheapest eggs possible for quite a poor population. But Stellenbosch University, one of the main universities in South Africa, has produced detailed research showing the much greater nutritional quality of free-range eggs. So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality too. There's so many reasons why we need to move away from low welfare industrial systems. You know, there is the antimicrobials issue, which if we lose their efficacy to treat human disease, that's going to affect everybody, rich and poor. More and more studies are now showing that it is the intensive systems which are the biggest danger for zoonoses and even future pandemics. So yes, I think even societies, and, you know, all European societies have some very poor parts of their population, and countries which are poor still need to move away from these industrial systems, which are also so environmentally damaging. I mean, for example, there's at least 2 studies I can think of, one of them from the FAO, showing that 90% of over 90% of water use and pollution is coming not from the farms, but the production of the feed for the animals. In other words, this very destructive system, so dependent on cereals and soy, is an environmental disaster. So yes, I don't think they're easy answers, but I think there is a need to move away. And certainly in Western Europe, the poorer members of society have, you know, deeply unhealthy diets. In other words, the current diet is not doing anybody very much good, and certainly in many countries it's clear that the poorer people are, the worse the diet and the more health, you know, diet-related health problems they're suffering from.
Can I just
Linda,
add in there and say, I also think it's important really not to put these against each other. We're looking for these win-win situations. Yeah. And there's a lot of work on capacity building to show that improving animal welfare can lead to improved human welfare. This is part of the One Health discussion. But this whole area, I think, is, we shouldn't be looking at one or the other. We should be finding these solutions where they both go together. And there are many examples where there is the link.
And it was interesting the term well-being was used, because you could also call it animal well-being. It's animal health and welfare. Where we even, a quick shout out, have the chair of the Animal Health and Welfare Panel of EFSA here, sir, and welcome. Good. Somebody else wants to say something about this question? Otherwise we move to the next one. Paul. PLF seems to be promising, so precision livestock farming. This, you know, where we human beings, we always like to sort of look for the solution in technology. We're strong at that. We're also good at that. We're not always very good at choosing the right technology, as we found out with cars, for example. Talk about that. But we are good at that, sort of saying the solution is in more technology and better advance. What is exactly needed for its implementation for animal welfare? What's the outcome measure? Any ideas?
Well, let me first highlight that I don't think that technology is the solution, but technology is helping or may help to improve animal welfare. So don't take me wrong on the message that technology should be put on the service to improve sustainability, but as many other strategies. Having said that, I think we're just having more and more evidence that technology and more specifically PLF can improve the way we know about animals and how they cope with the environment. But this is slowly being transferred into the production system. I think it will be a matter of time. So it will come one day or another once producers will realize that this is really giving some information that was not available for them. And I'm going to give you an example for this. Where in our current project at Clear Farm, we are working with pig producers in Spain, and we brought them some sensors assessing respiratory health for pigs. And initially, when we brought that fancy, system that goes in lights, green, red, and then the pig farmers say, "What is this? I mean, okay, you pay for that. I don't care. Put it, but I don't trust it much." And then after 1 year of trials, then we say, "Okay, trials are finished. We're going to take it, and thanks for all your support." And the farmer said, "Oh no, please." Leave it, the sensor, because it really helps me. So in short, I think going to producers and showing nice pictures, figures and stuff is not only what they need. They need to check it and to know that this really will give them something for animals and for the farm.
Thank you. Yes, please, Peter.
Paul, I thought your presentation was great. It's the closest I've ever come to being persuaded about precision livestock farming.
I'm glad.
Yes, of course I can see the benefits. I've got a concern that ultimately it will be used to entrench, large-scale intensive models. And yes, if you've got, 30 pig sheds, pig pens scattered through your shed, to know that a pig in pen 28 has started coughing is really helpful. You can do something about it. But I'd rather see us move away to more extensive small-scale systems. We've got a similar debate which is going to hit the EU shortly in England, where the government is now pushing through very quickly legislation to permit gene-edited animals to be used on farms. And one of the things they say is, oh, well, we can gene edit them to be more resistant to disease, which sounds great. But there's a danger, too, that what it's going to do is actually entrench what I'd call factory farming, because you're going to have animals that are resistant to the diseases that are fundamentally coming from keeping animals in crowded conditions. So I'm not anti-technology, but I think we do need to be very careful what kind of world is it going to create for us.
And if I may, you just answered one of the questions that we have here, which is, what are your thoughts on increasing animal welfare through quantitative genetics, selecting for less stressable animals? You did. Don't worry, Peter. I think you made that point very well right now. Let me go on to other questions that we also looked at. Why do you think there's a lack of awareness of the benefits between this link between animal welfare and sustainability? Any ideas? Or do we think everybody is aware? Then why are we sitting here? If it's no news anymore?
I personally think it's due to the traditional definitions of sustainability which emerged. I can't remember what decade it was, but in those early definitions of sustainability, they were very anthropocentric, and I think that's for me where it came from. The original origin of sustainability has a much more ecological focus. And are hundreds of years old. We've always known that we need to respect all three domains, and we can see that in many indigenous societies as well. However, in the 1950s and the 60s, the first reports and the first definitions that were being documented were very anthropocentric in their nature, and I believe that's where it's come from. It's only now that we're coming full circle to understand that we do have to embed all of these considerations, including the animals that we have domesticated, and therefore we have a duty of care to provide a good life for those animals. Again, as per my presentation, for the intrinsic value of animal welfare, but also the instrumental value in that good animal welfare has benefits for us as a society too.
Thank you. Please,
yeah,
Paul.
If I may. Yeah, I think that's a nice question, which is these win-win solutions that apparently we are all now focused because, as Linda mentioned, it's touching different sustainability goals. But perhaps I don't have a real explanation, but maybe we were just focused on addressing problems independently, and we haven't realized that excuse me, addressing problems, different problems at the same time, may also bring solutions for different problems. I remember I spot now a scientific study mentioning the relationship between stress in cows and greenhouse gas emissions, methane, suggesting somehow that less stressful cows will emit less methane. And then when this was circulated, people said, wow, that's interesting, because we were just focused on assessing methane. We're focused on assessing stress. Why not to go together for different problems? And I think it's good to have these kind of meetings on making awareness of that we should be considering problems in a more integrative way to be tackled.
Thank you. We have a very interesting question here, and I was in the session on One Health. It's for Barbara Badolino. She says, in this One Health session, infectious diseases, the education was highlighted as a key factor, and they mean human education. Is this, and not specific groups, they literally meant general education, not education on infectious diseases. Is this important also in one welfare? How should animal welfare be promoted in the education of professionals, farmers, and general public? So, two questions for me, because as I say, I was there. It was also about general education, meaning there is a clear impact and link to being better able, for example, regarding infectious diseases, be better understanding, etc., be better understanding regarding water usage, and all these sort of things. And here we talk about education. Will better educated people make better welfare choices? Or do you need to have specific education, professionals, farmers, and general public? Or do you not need education at all?
Coming from a university, I'm a big believer in education. And I would say, yes, you need both. In our research, and what I was reporting here, education was one of those that came up, showing it has a large pull on animal welfare. And that's supported by quite a lot of research showing that education influences people's attitudes towards animals. So this is general education, better schooling, changes how people think about things, animal welfare, but broader issues of it. And then, of course, the more specific knowledge a person has, the farmer, the advisor, then that's going to help them make better decisions. So it's education on both levels, the general knowledge, but also this specific knowledge that allows a person to make the right decision at the right time.
Please, Laura, you look like you want to come in.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is trying to add this in at a young age. From the, and this is definitely not my area, but the research that I have seen has shown that those feelings of empathy towards animals develop very young, and therefore looking at primary education as a good entry point for talking about animals, talking about sentience, introducing children to real life animals in a school setting or elsewhere, I think would be really important. And of course, linking that to the food system as well. There's lots of quite worrying evidence that kids and indeed adults don't understand the provenance of certain animal products, and that's obviously fundamental for everybody.
I think you're all reading also while here. You want to also say something, Peter, please.
The German paper that we heard, online was suggesting that farmers were responding by saying, but if the public knew more about livestock farming, they'd be less worried. I think the opposite is true. I think if the public knew what was going on, they'd be a lot more worried. I think education of the public, of the consumers, is so crucial. I just want to take one example. I think whereas much of the public is aware of things like cages and crates and overcrowding, perhaps even of mutilations, very few people are aware of the immense health and welfare problems that have just come from selective breeding over the last 50 years, pushing meat chickens to grow so quickly that many of them are suffering from leg disorders. Cows, which would naturally produce, just over 1,000 litres of lactation, being pushed to 10 to 12,000. This has a big impact on levels of lameness, mastitis, reproductive disorders. They're so utterly worn out often after about 4 lactations that they're prematurely culled. I could repeat this with every main farm species. And then goodness knows why the English government wants to push it further with gene editing, but that is another topic. So yes, I think the public needs to know much more about what's going on. Thanks.
Could I just add something?
Yes, please, Lara.
I absolutely agree with you, Peter. I think, yeah, there's a huge scope for improving public education around existing farming systems, for sure. My only challenge, or my only question to you is that we saw, again, I'm afraid a lot of my examples are UK focused, but there was a big TV campaign by one of our TV chefs, Hugh Fernley-Whittinstall. It was in the early 2000s about the broiler chickens, and the TV chef himself was crying in a shed, and it was very emotive and quite accurate as to what was going on there. And there was a massive dive in the purchase and consumption of the more sort of conventional chicken out there in the supermarket, but it quickly bounced back. And it is just a question to you as to how we sustain that level of awareness amongst the public without people reverting to what are very entrenched eating habits and consumption habits.
Again, like with so many questions, no easy answer. One has to keep campaigning and trying to get the message across. I've spent over 30 years of my life saying ban live exports in the UK, and finally the UK government is introducing legislation to ban live exports. But it's taken all of us 30 years, so we've just got to... And there's a lot of support now for the Better Chicken commitment. But slowly things get better.
I think that's also answered it in that once you have this big rush of awareness, if it's propped up by legislation, as per the laying hen example, there was again a big campaign for, I think, Tesco at the time to ban the sales of caged eggs, and it took a change in policy by our biggest retailer in the UK, and changes obviously in European legislation away from the barren battery cage, and so if it's propped up with a fairly quick sort of legislative or policy change from a retailer, then I suppose you get that pull through without people. They can't forget it then. They can't revert.
Legislation certainly helps, which gives me an opportunity, by the way, since I'm from EFSA, to say there will be animal welfare opinions coming out very soon, very important for the farm to fork legislation. So watch that space. We are on it, and there's more to come. For further details, please reference our website. But thank you, everybody, and also especially all the experts, some of them here today that were involved in that very good work. And thank you for the Commission to send us that work. Let us go to another question here. Interesting presentations. Besides animal welfare and sustainability, livestock, poultry, what is your input on aquaculture? I'm not sure I agree with that, it's an emerging sector. And farmed insects, that I would maybe call a more emerging sector. Is something might take okay, will this come onto the scene in the next years as I take in the farmed insects, maybe also as an additional alternative protein source, etc.? And should it be an alternative protein source more used for animals?
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at everybody here. But I remember you talking a lot about PAPs, essentially, is what I understand as PAPs, processed animal proteins.
Yes.
So the reuse of animal proteins to feed the animals rather than use, that was a major part of your talk, rather than reuse soy and cereals to go to animals when they should really go to humans.
Yes. And okay, aquaculture, I mean, many of the problems, you know, both welfare and sustainability are not, however different fish are, the problems are broadly similar, that very intensive aquaculture systems, you know, you get high levels of disease, high levels of injuries like fin erosions. So the problems are different from terrestrial animals, but the level of problems is very similar. It's wasteful use of wild-caught fish to feed farm fish. You know, we've got very similar patterns. So I don't think aquaculture really is helpful. Though again, as with terrestrial animals, obviously the best run farms are going to be doing a lot better than the average farm. Insects, I'm concerned again that it's just a way of kind of clinging desperately on to industrial farming. Oh, well, we're being criticised for using cereals, so we'll use insects instead. So go away, we've got insects, we'll carry on factory farming. Come on, let's from a sustainability, a health, and core animal welfare, let's get away from these systems. And I feel no expertise on this at all, though I have got colleagues who've got expertise. Insects, we shouldn't just assume that they are without... I talked earlier about the need for respect for the world in which we live, taking just billions of insects and crushing them up so we can get a few cheap pork chops and chicken nuggets. To me, this is totally unacceptable.
Please, Paul.
Yeah, if I may, regarding aquaculture, I think it certainly will or should follow the way of terrestrial livestock agriculture. I think there is already, and I think EFSA have released many scientific opinions on the sentience of fish and the need for humane slaughter, so stunning and so on. But again, and related to my presentation before, I think we need action. So we need changes. We have the evidence of fish suffering, and still European regulation has not changed. That's one of the points. Then the other, I think we should be ready that if we're gaining more knowledge on the sentience of other species, and more specifically like cephalopods, crustaceans, we should be ready to implement the same path as we did with other animal species. Because we implemented all the legislation based on a pathocentric point of view, that the animals can suffer, we should act. Therefore, if we gain evidence of further species having similar sentience, why not should we ask? Maybe that's more a question than a comment.
Let's go to a question from the audience again. To Laura. Have you introduced this decision-making tool to farmers? That reminds me, actually, when you said Gesa Bush, I think it was, that she said, farmers said, you know, you don't know enough about it. I think she said the sector, because we as vets and others that are in that sector of animal production need to very much look at ourselves, that we maybe grew up and maybe we're out of it, but with that sort of attitude of saying, you know, you out there, consumers, don't know enough about it. So I think just to be fair to farmers and be precise. But about tool to farmers, if yes, did they accept it well, that tool? Because that is all about that, where we have acceptance of these new ways of looking at it. Please, Laura.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. The answer is no, because the study is very much alive, and I'm in the middle of it. But in terms of engaging farmers, that's absolutely my intention, to involve them as a critical stakeholder in devising the inputs and outputs of the model, alongside retailers, so industry representatives, vets, even members of the public, etc. So that's certainly part of my plan. and sort of drawing on my work again at the Food Animal Initiative, where we work very much on the basis of collecting outcome measure, sort of key performance indicators from farms and supply chains. It's my experience that farmers respond very well when they're given a set of outcomes to aim for, as opposed to being more instructive and prescriptive about how they should farm. So we absolutely focus not on the production systems and how farmers are to produce food, but more give them a range of outcomes to aim for, and on performing, on achieving those outcomes, there is a potential then to offer rewards, incentives, etc. That is the basis of my research project, that hopefully if we can sort of benchmark farmers on an ongoing and a dynamic basis, they know that they are aiming for a certain level of positive outcomes for people, animals and the planet, and are rewarded accordingly. And I think that's more of an empowering approach to working with farmers than being more prescriptive, which is clearly how we've worked in the past, especially around providing subsidies and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Let me go to a question that must be for the panel really an open goal. If you didn't expect that question, then I cannot help you here. How is it possible to feed 9 billion people which have an increasing demand for proteins by reducing animal farming in the world? So, I mean, if you're not unprepared for that question, please.
The answer is it can really easily be done. I'm fascinated by data and figures, even though I'm not a scientist, and I've done endless calculations, which I'm very happy. I've got a short paper to share with people. Okay, worldwide, it's generally accepted we're wasting about 25% of our food. We then use quite a lot for biofuels, I mean smaller percentages. We overconsume. If we only consumed what we nutritionally need, we'd save a lot of food. But the biggest form of food loss, sorry to come back to this, is the use of human edible crops to feed animals. And I've done calculations, both, if I remember rightly, globally and certainly for the EU, the amount of food we lose by feeding it to animals. You know, even when you take account of the meat and milk they produce, but the amount that's lost because of poor conversion is greater than food loss in the normal sense of what we or the retailers throw away. And about 4 years I did a calculation, and I worked out that 61% of the world's crops are lost or wasted in that way. It's just staggering, and I thought I'd maybe got my arithmetic wrong, and then there was a peer review paper published at the same time. They calculated 60%, not 61%. It is just staggering. If we just halved these forms of food waste, we could easily feed the world's population. I can think of 2 papers that have actually tried to calculate if we stopped, I talked about half, these papers said, if we stopped feeding human edible crops altogether to animals, we could feed an extra 3.5 billion people every year. What we're doing at the moment is utter insanity.
Any of the others want to come in on that?
It's hard to follow that.
Okay, fair enough. Then I have one for you, Linda, which you must have had before. In public opinion, animals need to go outdoor, but it's in contrast with biosecurity. So again, as you know, taking this, it's one or the other. How much is needed to take into consideration public opinion? I wouldn't sort of focus on that question. Is it really a contrast?
No, and it depends on which species you're talking about as well. So, I mean, that's a rather general question. There's a lot of research showing the benefits for cattle of going outside, for the cattle themselves, but also as part of the system here and for biodiversity. If we're talking about poultry going outside, then we have to create a much more attractive environment outside where they feel safe with cover. And then also we have then avian influenza. So maybe we have to think a little bit smarter and be thinking about these outside but protected winter gardens or whatever, verandas, whatever you want to type of call them, where the animals can go partly outside but feel the secure and things, but we are protecting them from other wild animals that come in. So I think it's very important what species you're thinking about. And then also you have to do the risk assessment of it. What is out there that they can catch and how can you manage it?
Thank you very much. Let's look what we have. I think this is a good one. How should we communicate about animal welfare changing habits without creating additional chasms between people? I guess it's about, if I ask you all who's a vegan, who's a vegetarian, who's a meat eater. I heard this the other day. I said, I heard about the animal health and welfare panel. Well, what would happen if that was full of vegetarians? Wouldn't that be a bias? And I thought, well, it's a bias now because I guess it's not full of vegetarians. It's the wrong question to ask. If you divide the world into sort of what they eat, in this case, how do you communicate? What is the best way of doing this?
Well, I don't have the idea of what's the best way of doing it, but I think it's very important to discuss this and let people form their views and adapt their eating habits. So they're making informed decisions. And you were talking earlier on about choices. Yeah. When people are in the supermarket making a choice, if that's made on price, but it can also be made on what they know about this and how animals are kept. So I think this more open dialogue is really important, and then giving people a choice that's transparent, so you really do know what you're paying for and not just buying a nice picture on a package.
On a package.
Please, yeah. I think I totally agree with that one. There was an excellent talk in the social sciences discussion yesterday where the speaker highlighted how people do not want to be persuaded, and if they feel they're being persuaded, they will switch off. It's more about providing that information, and I think that's just critical. There's a really great TED talk on sort of trying to harness your advice monster. People do not want to receive advice. They do want to be informed, but it often will switch people off. And I think that's really important. But ultimately, we do have a humongous planetary and societal crisis out here. And we know as scientists, as farmers, as informed citizens, that we have a massive job to do in the food system. So we do have to be much better at communicating. Again, there's a really lovely discussion in the social sciences talks yesterday with data visualization and trying to make that much more engaging. I think there's a huge piece to do around that. And finally, my last point would be trying to encourage diversity in our diets. That is the big one for me. It's not necessarily about banning beef from campus menus, which is going on across the UK at the moment. That's one approach, but it does feel reductionist, overly simplistic, when actually what we could be doing is offering, admittedly, a sort of a less but better approach to the consumption of animal products, but offering much more diverse diets that perhaps reflect what we're producing in our own countries, as well as what's being sustainably produced overseas too, and sustainably transported as well. So diversity for me is absolutely critical.
Because you mentioned that I have not, just out of interest, I'm speaking under the control of the organizers a little bit here, but I have not noticed any meat on our menu at this conference yet. So I just want to say, but maybe...
I think there's chicken.
Was there chicken at some stage? I'm not sure.
There's definitely salmon sandwich.
Very little, huh? Yeah, it was a conscious effort also.
But also it would be interesting to know about the sustainability sourcing of it as well.
And here, exactly, given the topic of the conference. Absolutely right. And this is where we need to go. I want to be a bit provocative as we're nearing the end, because I do want to respect the time. People are tired. It's been a long day for many people, also online, as we know. That can be very tiring. So if you have a choice, because what I've heard this afternoon, I've heard about, in terms of solution, there was labeling was mentioned, the cup, a very big but very blunt instrument of subsidizing let's call it the livestock system, farming system also as well. We heard about the importance of people having pets. And we heard about food waste. So if you had one choice to either change the cup in order to be more focused on the sustainability, to introduce labeling as soon as possible in order to introduce the concept or strengthen choice for welfare and sustainability, buy everybody, I'm provocative, a pet hamster, and force through as early as possible through a citizens' initiative food waste legislation that allows the diminishing of food waste. So we're talking cup, labeling, everybody gets a pet. We can't force anybody to do that, but of course, you know, everybody that wants to get a pet, or legislation on food waste. Which would you choose? And why?
I don't need a hamster because I've got 2 wonderful Spanish dogs. I wouldn't choose any of those. I think we need to go, it's interesting, it's not come up this afternoon, we need to go to true cost accounting. We've got, you know, a very distorted economic system which takes account of some factors. So yes, we factor in the cost of feed, the cost of housing, the cost of labour. We totally ignore the health and environmental costs that arise from certain kinds of livestock production. There's masses of data. Sorry, I keep talking, Daniela, about the FAO, but the FAO has produced a lot of kind of interesting data about just, you know, the huge costs involved in the current food system in terms of health impacts and greenhouse gas emissions. There was again an FAO paper that said that there's, I can't remember exactly, but there's a worrying disconnect in many countries between the retail price of food and the true cost of its production. And the paper went on to say that as a result of this, you know, many environmentally damaging foods in terms of loss of biodiversity, air pollution, actually appear at retail level to be cheaper than more sustainable alternatives.
And have you got one action that we can take out of here today to make true cost accounting a reality?
Right, we impose, and I know this is going to sound radical, we impose taxes on unhealthy, unsustainable food. We use every cent of that money to lower the cost.
But you need to have the accounting, the figures first, in order to know what taxes to put.
But there's plenty of figures.
Okay, so your solution is introduce taxes or get true cost accounting?
Unhealthy, unsustainable, low welfare food. I'd use every penny of that to lower the cost of sustainable food and vegetables. I would also, in tandem, introduce a tax on the use of cereals and soy as feed, on the use of agrochemicals, and use every penny of that to support farmers who are really doing good, sustainable things.
Linda, you can also choose something else than the 4.
Okay. It's so difficult. I'm a great believer in the incentives. I like this idea of nudging, making it easy for people to do the right thing. And this is not only farmers or consumers, but I mean everybody in society to do the right thing. And if it's the right thing to reduce the amount of waste, then that's the way. If it's the right thing to give incentives for people to, by changing the common agricultural policy and making it easier to go to these other systems, then that's okay. So nudging to move us slowly forward, I think, is the tool that I would like. And I think then you can be moving forward on this broader front.
Thank you. Laura.
Yeah, it's difficult to follow this. I also like the nudging and I like the sustainability. But just a point about the pets, just to say there's a massive trade-off there that we can't ignore, and I'm definitely all for the benefits of pet ownership for animal welfare and emotional well-being, etc. But we do know the significant footprint of pet ownership in terms of environmental costs, and there are interesting papers being released. One by my PhD supervisor about Dominic Moran regarding certainly the carbon footprint of the meat that goes into pet food diets. It's about 25% of the meat that we consume as a society, and I think if we could attribute land use to that meat production, it would be about double the UK size. So that's something just to bear in mind. I know a hamster is.
As a vet, I just wanted to say yes. Hopefully not for hamsters.
That one, I find the food waste choice very compelling, and I think that it's such a huge issue that I'd probably go for that as a starter for 10, just to caveat it. I think if we could cut food waste tomorrow, it's amongst the top in terms of project drawdown. It's a significant contributor, but if we did that too, it would have huge knock-ons for the other aspects of sustainability too. So I'd probably start with that, but the others sound great too, apart from hamster. Thank you.
But not only the reduction of food waste, also making it possible again in a safe way. Let's remember the BSE crisis. That's why EFSA exists. do reuse food waste. No, that was part of that. Okay, Paul.
Yeah, if we're talking about animal welfare, I would say I would also be inclined on Linda's opinion on pulling or incentivize people, so giving incentives, so rather pulling than pushing, and that can be done in many ways. I guess one way is consumer awareness, so consumers are buying, so are pulling producers towards something that is, more welfare friendly. And then the other pull can also come from like benefits or, the common agricultural policy cap, also on pulling those farmers that produce better in terms of animal welfare. So if I have to select among these four, I would, do a combination between the two, if I may.
Well, thank you very much. Our time is up. I hope the audience found this stimulating, a bit of fun, and also engaging, because that's the main thing. For further information on all the interesting work, you can find it, I'm sure, online very easily for Paul, Laura, Linda, and Peter. Thank you very much, and I hand over to our chair for the final words. Thank you, Mette.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Nick and panelists, for this. I think it has been super interesting to listen to your discussion. And it was impressive, I think, that you managed to educate us while you spoke about education. Yeah, that's not so bad. And I will now wrap up today's session quickly. I will do that by giving you 3 housekeeping messages, and then I have 2 extra quick points. And the first, my first housekeeping message is related to tomorrow, and the plenary session there. I would like to remind you about the plenary session in the Golden Hall tomorrow morning at 8:30, where conclusions from today's session will be presented and will also be debated. So 8:30 Golden Hall. And second, I have a message from EFSA. Can I have the slide? Yes. Excellent, thank you. Because I am happy to share with you that an online public event will be held on September 26, focusing on the mandates of the protection of animals during transport, and also on housing of pigs and how it relates to animal welfare. And please take note of the date if you are interested. More information will be given soon. And my last point is that I would like to remind the online audience about the opportunity to meet the speakers here after the session. It happens in the so-called online lounge, and if you're interested, you can join via the app. Okay. Then it's time to really wrap up, and I would like to thank everyone, attendees here and also online, and the speakers and the moderator for coming and for sharing your knowledge, your questions and your answers also with us on this super interesting topic. But before I really finalize, I have one final point that I would like to mention too, and that is that I would like to thank the EFSA staff. They are over there in the back. Yes, and I hope you will help me. Because it was all their hard work organizing this session that allowed us to have such interesting discussion and made my day so easy. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy your evening.